and welcome to the 21st episode of Course Place. I'm so glad you've chosen to join me for today's conversation. In today's episode, I will be sharing my life story/testimony. As always, if you like what you hear, please leave a review and/or comments, follow my podcast, and tell your friends. Also, please follow the podcast page I've made on Facebook. If you'd like to contact me via email instead of a Facebook message, you can email me at corachin@mailbox.org. If you are new here, welcome. I'm your host, Cora, and I am so excited to have you on this journey with me. Today, I want to share my life story/testimony with you all. But before I get into it, I just want to say a huge thank you to those of you who have subscribed to my podcast and have shared it with your friends. I'm so grateful that I get to do this podcast. It hasn't always been easy, but I love getting to do it for you all. Now, let's get on to my life story/testimony. I would imagine that many of you have questions that you've wondered about me, but are unsure of how to start the conversation, or you are nervous about asking me things. So, I will help you with that right now. Before I was born, the doctors didn't think that I would live very long from all the issues I had, but thankfully, my parents chose life for me. The doctors also said I had problems that I ultimately didn't have, and I have exceeded their prognosis. I was born with something called hydrocephalus, which is water or fluid on the brain. So, I have something called a shunt on the right side of my head to drain the fluid, and I've had it since I was a baby. It will always be a part of me. You can't see it though because it's on the inside of my body and not the outside. I also have some facial disfigurements, a cleft lip and palate, and my right eye is a prosthetic because I was born missing my real eye. I also had amniotic band syndrome, so my feet and hands formed differently than most other people's. I had several surgeries when I was younger. I also did speech and occupational therapies too. Some other things I faced when I was growing up, and still face even now sometimes, is that people, mostly kids, stare at me, ask me why I look this way, or sometimes make fun of me. As you can imagine, when someone points out something about us that makes us feel self-conscious, it bothers me/makes me feel uncomfortable. It used to happen a lot when I was little, but thankfully, it doesn't happen as much now. It is hard to talk about sometimes, as this kind of thing is not in a typical day-to-day conversation for me. I am the oldest of 5 kids, and I was homeschooled all of my life, other than an art class I took when I was younger. Like I'm sure at least some of you did as well, I grew up going to church from the time I was born. I got saved in 2012 at a VBS I attended at my mom's childhood church, and I was baptized on February 7th, 2016. However, my faith didn't really become genuine to me and really start growing until around late 2018 when I asked God to help me become closer to Him. In March 2019, my family began attending a new church on Sunday mornings, the church we are currently at now as of the recording of this episode. For a few weeks prior to that, we had attended the Saturday service at one of the other campuses so that we could attend what was still our home church at the time on Sundays. Now, at least as of the recording of this episode, my family attends a traditional service/campus. Coming to our current church was a big adjustment for me because I didn't really know anyone there, and I probably knew just about everyone in my old church then because it was a small church and I had grown up going there. For most people, the teen years are a roller coaster with lots of hills and valleys. It has been that way for me too. In 2021, I went to Montana for my first time to visit family that I have mentioned in previous episodes, and it was a totally incredible trip that I want to cherish forever. I participated in Awana from the time that I was 3 years old to 12th grade. I'm so glad I persevered all those years so that I could receive the highest award that they have, which is called the Citation Award, in April of 2022. To get that, I had to memorize many Bible verses over the years, as well as fulfilling other requirements. I got my first job in the summer of 2023, working at a camp in the dining hall and cleaning for 2 months during the camping season, and I enjoyed it. Change is very hard for me, and I faced many trials throughout my life that tested and grew my faith/trust in God as a result of them. Some of those trials I have faced in life include moving to our current house, as of the recording of this episode, from our old apartment in fall of 2019, and when we started attending our church now, well, as of the recording of this episode, in spring of 2019, which I've talked about a little bit in previous episodes. My family and I had lived in the same apartment for the majority of my life, up until just a couple of months after I turned 15. So moving to our current house, as of the recording of this episode, was a big adjustment for me. From January 2020 to April of 2022, I attended the high school small groups at my church right now, as of the recording of this episode, and they were an amazing season for me, even though I had missed part of the full 4 years. I loved going, and I formed some great friendships because of them. I also went through 3 friendship losses or struggles too in my teen years, which has been painful, challenging, and something I still wrestle with at times. As of the recording of this episode, I am still living at home with my family, continuing to try and navigate life post-high school. I've applied for a few jobs, but I don't know right now, as of the recording of this episode, what God has in store for me for future work or education. God is teaching me a lot of different things, like choosing faith over fear and trusting in Him. I really enjoy producing this podcast as a hobby, and several other hobbies too, like baking, writing, and music, etc. I currently don't know exactly where I want to be in life a few years from now, but I do know that I want to remain in community with other believers, go to Montana to spend time with all of my relatives there whenever I can, and find a job I would enjoy doing long term too. I hope you enjoyed listening to that. I was given an opportunity to share my life story/testimony to a small group I attended at my church as of the recording of this episode, and that's what I had written, with some edits to it for this episode. It was mostly untouched when I put it in for this episode, but I just needed to make some minor edits, as there were a couple of things I said when originally sharing that didn't apply here in this situation, which was mostly just talking about being in the same room. When I shared it with my small group, I was really nervous before, but it was a really great way for me to step out in faith and trust that God would be with me throughout the process. It wasn't easy, but I'm glad that I did it. Sometimes we just have to step out in faith, even when it's hard or scary. It may not be easy, but when we do that, it's a very good thing and helps us grow in our faith. Growing in our faith matters and is important in our relationship with God. If we never grow in our faith, how will we learn to trust God when trials hit? That is something that even I am still working on doing in my own life. I am definitely not an expert on that subject, and I am simply just sharing things that I struggle with, in hopes that it can encourage and motivate us all to try harder in life. Also, I apologize for using the phrase, as of the recording of this episode, a lot today, but I don't know where my life will be in the future, so I want to make sure it was as accurate as I can make it for today's episode. Life can change in an instant. Life is not always going to be the same thing every day for our whole lives. It will change at some point, either for the best or possibly for the worst. We can have really good days, but we can also have really hard and terrible days too. Through it all, whether good or bad, God is with us and will never leave us. We weren't promised an easy, pain-free life. We are going to go through hard times. That's why it matters where we put our hope and trust in, and what we build the foundation of our lives on. We can either be like the wise man who built his house on the rock, or we can be like the foolish man who built his house on the sand. In Matthew 7, verses 24 through 27, in the English Standard Version, Jesus says, "Everyone then who hears these words of mine and does them will be like a wise man who built his house on the rock. And the rain fell, and the floods came, and the winds blew and beat on that house, but it did not fall, because it had been founded on the rock. And everyone who hears these words of mine and does not do them will be like a foolish man who built his house on the sand. And the rain fell, and the floods came, and the winds blew and beat against that house, and it fell, and great was the fall of it." You can feel free to email me, send me a voice message through the link if you're listening on any platform, except for those listening on YouTube. YouTube has it in the channel's About section. Or send me a message on Facebook on the Chorus Place podcast page. The 4 questions I want to close with are: 1. What qualities do you think a wise man would have versus what a foolish man would have? 2. Where do you think your foundation is built? 3. How would you explain the meaning of a foundation built on Jesus to newer Christians who may not have learned about that in their faith yet, or to somebody who doesn't currently believe in God? 4. Based on your answer to number 3, who is one person in your life who is struggling in their faith or not a believer that you could explain that to? Hope you enjoyed today's episode. If you did, please follow, leave a comment and a review of my podcast if you haven't already, and please follow my podcast page on Facebook so you never miss an update. If you have any verses you'd like me to read on a future episode, or if you have any topics you'd like me to talk about, you can email me at corachin@mailbox.org, send me a message on my podcast page on Facebook, or voice message through the link in the show notes, and I will get back to you when I can. Hope you tune in next week for the 22nd episode.